Hello， 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。Washington passed a law in 2011 which basically stopped NASA being able to work with China in any way, which meant, among other things, that the China National Space Administration can't even use the so-called International Space Station and had to build its own. But now that China is making leaps and bounds in space, cash-strapped NASA has applied to Congress to ignore that law so that its scientists can borrow moon samples from China. Another example of the US shooting itself in the foot. Do you think China should play ball? Today we'll talk about it. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boreham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. The China National Space Administration, which collected nearly 2 kilograms of valuable lunar samples from an area of the moon not yet investigated by other missions, opened up applications from foreign scientists to loan samples for their research in August this year. The samples, collected during the Chang'e 5 mission in 2020, were sourced from the base of a former lunar volcano. What is so significant about the sample is that it was found by Chinese scientists to be only about 2 billion years old, much younger than expected. NASA, who have been stymied by Washington's Wolf Amendment for more than a decade, don't want to pass up this opportunity to receive samples from China and conduct their own research. So they've told Congress that they intend to ignore the draconian law in this instance and file applications with the China National Space Administration. Applications close on December 22. This, according to the South China Morning Post. In an internal email on Wednesday, the US Space Agency said it had certified its intent to Congress to allow NASA-funded researchers to apply to the CNSA for access to the lunar samples collected by China's Chang'e 5 mission in 2020. The applications would normally be illegal under the so-called Wolf Amendment, passed by the US Congress in 2011 and named after then Republican Senator Frank Wolf, which bans NASA from cooperating with China unless authorized by lawmakers. According to the NASA email, the application for access was necessary because of the unique value of the Chinese samples, which had been made available recently to the international scientific community for research purposes. As Alanis Morissette would say, isn't it ironic? Washington passed the Wolf Amendment as a way to halt China's progress in space exploration, even excluding Chinese taikonauts from visiting and working on the International Space Station. This forced China to make its own space station, Tiangong, which by all accounts is much more modern and comfortable than the decrepit ISS. The Wolf Amendment also forced China to dive headfirst into its own lunar exploration missions, becoming the first to land a rover on and investigate the far side of the moon in 2018. NASA, which is facing ongoing budgetary issues, cannot compete with China's space programs, which will make Washington's hegemonic Wolf Amendment more and more debilitating for American space research and for NASA itself. US scientists, long stymied by Washington's restrictions on collaboration with China's National Space Administration, are excited with the news. According to Space.com, Clive Neal, a leading expert on the moon at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, said, "This is excellent news as it allows US-based scientists to bring their expertise to investigating these unique lunar samples." The website added, "Such sample exchanges led to a thawing of relations through science diplomacy," Neil said, "and this is an amazing start." Chang'e 6, which Space.com says is set to launch next year, will become the first to bring back lunar samples from the far side of the moon. But many Chinese netizens were a bit miffed by the call from NASA. One commented, "So you use unilateral sanctions when it suits and ignore them when it doesn't. So overbearing." Another added, "I won't give you what I have, but you have to give me what you have." That is the thinking of Americans. Someone else posed a question. Does this prove that back then the US never really landed on the moon? Well, I'll answer that one myself. Not necessarily. The reason China's lunar samples are so valuable to US and other scientists is because they come from an area of the moon not explored before. I asked you guys on Twitter whether or not you'd give Chinese samples to US scientists. There were 6,000 votes at the time of shooting this video, with the vast majority of you, 78.3%, saying you would not. Just 10.8% said you would send samples to the US, and 10.9% answered maybe. To be honest, I think the China National Space Administration will agree to send samples to NASA scientists, just because China is much more of a mature and responsible government which prefers to do what is right, as opposed to playing pointless games that don't help the world at all. China's government is definitely the adult in the room, and they know that sending the samples is the mature thing to do. But it does really annoy me, and many of you guys as well. George commented, "The US has not been a good global citizen and has not treated China well at all. So just leave the US to its own devices to figure things themselves if they're too smart for their own good." Kevin James Ng added, "It should be shared among BRI partners who signed up with China Space Station Collaboration and also with ESA, whom have participated in the Chang'e 5 project. It shows that NASA is declining." Aijin said, "No, those hypocrites need a dose of their own medicine. It's time someone stands up to the US and calls it for what it is, a bully." But many of you stepped back from your initial anger to try and see the wider picture. United Koreas said, "My personal response would be hell no, but China wants to take the high ground, I understand." Deborah added, "This is an opportunity to communicate generosity, diplomacy, and a willingness at cooperation. Scientific pursuits are meaningful, helps build trust and improve relationships until and unless politics get in the way." So we can definitely add this example to our myriad of other instances where the US has done its best to cripple China's development in many areas and seen it backfire embarrassingly. Remember how Huawei was viciously attacked by Washington in an attempt to shut it down? What about the computer chip ban, which saw China speed up development of its own computer chip industry, now putting US companies and US supremacy in danger? Don't forget the EV car industry. China is now the largest producer of EV cars in the entire world and holds a massive majority of the world's capacity to produce batteries. So what does the US do? Limit US car companies' ability to use China's advanced technology. Honestly, it's quite hilarious watching Washington drive towards the edge of a cliff at full speed. But despite all this, China continues to soldier along, advancing in leaps and bounds, completely unbothered by the childish, reckless, and self-destructive actions of Washington. It reminds me of that famous quote from The Art of War: "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." And on that note, that will be it for today's video, you guys. But as always, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do let me know down below. And also don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.